Good evening. Tonight, I'm bringing you a collection of 13 cases told across 25 parts. These are the kind of stories that stay with you, the ones that make you double-check the locks and wonder about the darkness just beyond the light. Each case is real, each detail verified. If you're here for the deep dives into the strange and unsettling, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let's get started. Outside, the rain has started. Softly at first, then steadier, drumming against the windows in that hypnotic way rain has late at night. The kind of rain that makes streets glisten and shadows deeper. The kind of rain that was falling on the river near his house in 1898 on a day he went out to play. And this is where the first story begins. In the year 1898, a 12-year-old boy named Wofford was playing at a river. This river ran near his home, deep in the forest. He had a bow and arrow with him, practicing his shots near the stream. After a little while, he got bored of practicing with his bow and arrow, so he went down to the river itself, deciding to build a dam. This little dam was meant to try and catch some fish. Wofford was down on his knees, deep in concentration, building the dam. That is when he noticed someone walking down the river towards him. The boy looked up and saw a gentleman who appeared normal. He was a stranger, wearing a nice suit. The man walked over to Wofford, seeming to have just emerged from the woods. "Hey, what are you doing?" the man asked him. Wofford replied that he was building a fish trap. The gentleman told Wofford that the task looked like a lot of work. He suggested the boy should take a break. Wofford agreed that he could use a rest. The stranger then offered an invitation. He told Wofford he could come to his house just up past the bend in the river. The man said his family was there and the boy could have a meal with them. Afterward, Wofford could come back to finish his fish trap. This was the late 1800s, a different time. While it was not necessarily cool to go with strangers, Wofford felt compelled to say yes. He did not want to be rude to the man. The boy also thought his fear of strangers might be less extreme than it is today, so Wofford agreed to go with the gentleman. They walked past the river and a little deeper into the forest. Soon they came upon a cabin. Wofford played in these woods often, but he had never seen this house before. Still, he was not overly concerned because the lights were on. As he got closer to the cabin, he heard the sounds of children playing inside. He also saw a close family friend sitting on the porch. This friend was talking to one of the other apparent family members of the stranger. Wofford was immediately put at ease by this sight. He said hello to the family friend, who waved back. The boy went inside the cabin. He saw that the family had a few kids roughly his age. They were playing and goofing around, just having fun. The family shared a wonderful dinner with Wofford. He thought the meal was great, truly enjoying himself. After the meal was finished, Wofford laid down and fell asleep. He completely lost track of the time while he was resting. Wofford woke up early the next morning feeling terrible. He had not meant to fall asleep in the cabin. He also had not told anyone from his family where he was going to be. The boy worried that they must be so worried about him. As he was preparing to leave, the stranger who had invited him was already awake. Wofford asked the man if he could walk him back down to the river. The stranger said he could take him part of the way, agreeing to help. The two of them began walking and making small talk. Wofford thanked the man for his incredible generosity and the meal. As they walked, they passed an orchard on one side of the trail. On the other side was a large cornfield. It was a beautiful morning, the sun just coming up over the horizon. Wofford remembers thinking how stunning the setting was around them. But he was also thinking he did not even know where he was right now. He assumed the stranger was walking him back toward his home. Yet, the surroundings looked totally unfamiliar to him. The stranger stopped walking as they got to a junction. It was right at the end of the orchard and the cornfield. The man told the boy, Wofford, to go straight down the path. He said Wofford would turn down away and be back at the river where they met. Wofford thanked the stranger again for his help. The man turned around and started walking back toward his cabin. "Hey, good luck." "See you," he told the boy as he left. Wofford started following the gentleman's directions toward the river. As Wofford walked away, following the directions, he became curious about the man. He turned around to look back at the strange person who had brought him to the cabin. He was stunned by what he saw behind him. Suddenly, the orchard and the cornfield were nowhere to be found. There was no sign of either the orchard or the field. Instead, there was only deep, dark forest. Wayford thought, "What is going on here?" He turned back around and saw something else coming toward him. It looked exactly like a search party was running to find him. Part of this group was the family friend he had seen sitting on the porch. Wofford was looking at the people running toward him. He recognized the family friend who was looking urgently. The boy knew they were desperately looking for him. He felt terrible because he knew he had slept through the entire night. "Hey, I'm here! I'm here!" Wofford shouted at them. "Where have you been?" they asked him. The boy turned to the family friend for an explanation. "Didn't you tell them I was with you?" Wofford asked. The family friend was completely shocked. "What are you talking about?" he replied. Wofford explained that they were at the house with the family and ate dinner together last night. The guy, his family friend, then told him something terrifying. "I've been looking for you for the past several days," the friend said. "I've been with your family looking for you. You've been gone for 3 days." Wofford said, "What?" completely confused. As he tried to describe the general vicinity of the cabin, pointing back toward the river area. The family members told the boy something even stranger. They said that since Wofford had been missing, they heard rhythmic drumming constantly. It was coming from the exact section of the forest he described. They could never pinpoint the drumming source. Now that he had just shown up, the rhythmic drumming had finally stopped. The child was terrified by this revelation. There were no easy answers for what had just happened to him. The stolen car was recovered 3 days later, 200 miles south in Tampa. Something far darker was unfolding. A case that would challenge everything investigators thought they knew about human nature. This is that story. In July of 2014, the United States Navy decided it was time to decommission an old frigate ship, so they sent the vessel to a dock to be broken down for scrap. For workers to access the ship's underside, they would need to dry dock the vessel. This meant the ship would drive into a special locking corral with doors shutting behind it. The water would then drain out from underneath the ship. The vessel would be left resting on huge wooden blocks, elevating it off the ground. With the water gone, workers could get underneath the hull without obstruction. They could access every part of the ship at that point. It is important to remember that when a ship is in dry dock, there is only one way on or off. This single entry point is a ramp called a gangway. The gangway leads from the dock onto the deck of the ship. Besides this ramp, there is nowhere else for anyone to get onto the vessel. If someone really wanted to get on, they could theoretically try to run and leap from the dock to the ship. There is a significant gap all the way around the ship, making this very dangerous. If a person was unsuccessful at grabbing onto the ship, they would fall multiple stories, probably to their death. This is because there is no water left in the dry dock. This old frigate ship being decommissioned was officially dry docked in July of 2014. The first group of people to go on board the ship were military personnel. They were in charge of removing all of these sensitive equipment. The civilians would only be allowed to go on board afterward. The military personnel began to wrap up their duties for the day. It was getting late in the afternoon at this point. They went to the foreman, who was in charge of all the civilian workers. This foreman would oversee the finishing of the ship's decommissioning. They told the foreman they were done, wrapped up for the night. They also said the foreman's workers were good to go and could get on the ship tomorrow. The foreman sent a message to his boss that night. He let the boss know that they were on track to start work the very next day. The boss wrote back immediately and gave the foreman a new instruction. He asked the foreman to go onto the ship tonight and take pictures of all the different workstations. This was so the boss would know how many people they would need to place in different segments of this large ship. The foreman agreed to this and walked onto the ship. He proceeded to take hundreds of pictures all over the inside of the vessel. The ship itself was pitch black inside at this point. There was no electricity running on the vessel, and it was nighttime outside. So the foreman carried a flashlight the entire time he was on board. Whenever he took a picture, he would turn his flashlight off. He would then use the flash on his camera for the image. Afterward, he would go back to his actual flashlight. He went room to room all night, taking all these necessary pictures. At some point, he realized he had photographed everything he needed for the boss, so he left the ship and went back to his office. The foreman uploaded all the pictures he had taken. He sent the full collection to his boss shortly after. His boss wrote back almost immediately after receiving them. The entire response was only one short question. Who's the guy with the axe? The foreman was completely confused, having no idea what the boss was talking about. He had been in the ship by himself for a couple of hours and saw no one. So he read the email again to make sure he had understood correctly. The boss had actually attached the picture he was referring to in the email. The image showed a guy clearly clutching an axe in a hallway. It was a hallway the foreman had just been in. Even creepier, the foreman looked at where this picture was taken. It was taken relatively early on during his photography session. He realized he had walked past the exact area where this guy was poking his head out. This meant the whole time the foreman was down there, this man with an axe was there with him. They reviewed the security footage from a camera aimed directly at the ramp. This ramp was the one entrance in and out of the decommissioned ship. From the moment the foreman left the vessel, no one else was seen leaving. The man with the axe was still inside the dry-docked frigate. But here is the thing about this man. Investigators were never able to determine how he got on or off the ship without being detected. But somehow, he did. Justice had been served. Across the country in Phoenix, Arizona, a worse nightmare was taking shape. What appeared routine would become the city's most disturbing case. This is that story. In March of 2010, a man in his mid-50s named John Schmier was sitting at a table. He was inside a Hooters restaurant in the small city of York, Pennsylvania. He was surrounded by a bunch of his close friends. John was a retired eye doctor who had a very successful career. He had made a lot of money during his time working. His friends at the table were also pretty successful guys. They were mid to upper tier professionals who had very successful careers as well. But what they were doing today had absolutely nothing to do with their careers. This gathering was purely for pleasure and relaxation. This specific group of friends was very, very close to one another. They would meet up a couple of times a month at this particular Hooters location. They would sit at the same table every time they met. They would always order the exact same things off the menu. They loved this ritual, which was sort of like their little clubhouse. In fact, they had even come up with a name for their close group of friends. They called themselves the Orange Shorts Society. The reason they chose this name is because Hooters has a very specific vibe. If you have been there, you know exactly what I am talking about. The waitresses dress in scantily clad clothing. They all wear these sort of iconic white tank tops and orange shorts. The men were joking that they were the Orange Shorts Society. The name came from the iconic shorts all these women wore. That afternoon, John and the rest of the members of the society sat around. They were chatting and essentially just being guys with each other. At some point, John brought up a subject that his friends were accustomed to hearing. This topic was his ex-wife, Monica. All of his friends knew that John had been married to Monica for 20 years. They got divorced in 2003, 7 years earlier. But Monica was still a thorn in John's side for one big reason. He had to pay her alimony on a regular basis. John understood that this comes with the territory of divorce. It is what it is, he knew. But Monica had made the process of paying her really cumbersome. John was totally convinced, as he would tell his buddies, that this was intentional. He felt she had made the process cumbersome because she hated him. She wanted it to be hard for him. John felt she was punishing him in this way. What Monica did was she made John literally take cash out of an ATM each week. He then had to put the cash in an envelope. Finally, he had to physically drive the money to her house and drop it off. She would not accept payment in any other way. The reason she was able to enforce this rule was that she claimed she did not have a bank account. She argued she could not be forced to open one. So John either had to make these cumbersome payments in cash, or he risked not making the payment at all. If he missed a payment, she could legally come after him. So he was basically trapped making this trek once a week. He had to hand over cash to his ex-wife, who he really could not stand anymore. Their divorce itself was not super contentious, according to reports. The two of them had simply drifted apart and stopped seeing eye to eye. Monica actually really did not like the whole Orange Short Society thing at all. She thought it was scummy, disgusting behavior. She believed John and his buddies were gross for going to that restaurant. She did not like them making jokes about what those women were wearing. Making that part of their identity, the Orange Short Society, deeply upset her. So they had just kind of drifted apart, which was all it was supposed to be. But now it had become this bitter, ongoing feud between the two of them. At the same time, John and his buddies are sitting in the restaurant. The tension is growing. John is going on his tirade once again about Monica's alimony payments. Simultaneously, on the other side of town, police were rushing to Monica's house. Minutes earlier, a 911 call came from Monica's residence. But when the operator answered the phone, there was no answer. By protocol, they immediately sent first responders out to the house. They needed to see if the person who called was okay. The police arrived at Monica's house and parked their vehicles. They walked right up to the front door and began knocking loudly. There was no answer from anyone inside. They looked around the quiet area. There was no sign of forced entry or anything really going on. It was just a quiet afternoon in the neighborhood, seemingly peaceful. They went to the door one more time. They knocked a few more times on the solid wood. When there was still no answer, they tried the doorknob. They found it was completely unlocked. They opened the door and looked inside the home. Right away, they saw Monica on the ground, dead. The phone was lying right next to her body. She had been shot directly in the head. Detective Douglas Demagon, the lead investigator, arrived shortly after this discovery. He began to survey the crime scene with his team immediately. They quickly found a purse next to Monica's body. Inside the purse, they located her license, which was how they were able to identify her. They also found a .32 caliber shell casing lying near the body. This shell casing clearly seemed to be from the round that had struck her in the head. It was the bullet that had killed her. The devastating evidence. But perhaps the most unusual aspect of this entire crime scene had nothing to do with the body itself. It was all the money the officers found scattered all over the house. Specifically, there was cash everywhere. The cash was found in envelopes that were sitting in trash cans and drawers. They were also found on tables, a shocking sight. The cash was all over the place, some out in the open and some hidden away. There were definitely lots of money stashed in this home, sitting right there. Demagon and the other investigators began to wonder if this was a robbery that had gone wrong. Maybe Monica got killed during the process. But if it was a robbery, why was so much cash left out in the open? The money was literally packaged up in envelopes, easy to remove from the house. Why was all of it still here? It was almost like no cash was taken at all. Certainly not very much cash was removed from the scene. Other valuables were also still in place around the home. The scene did not have the feel of somebody ransacking the house for valuables. It just felt like somebody had come in here and killed Monica quickly. This detail was impossible to ignore. Detective Demagon and his team searched the whole house thoroughly. They could not find any sign of forced entry anywhere, leading to a strange conclusion. This meant whoever came in here and committed this murder either just walked in because a door was unlocked, maybe Monica let them in, which meant she knew who they were, or they might have simply had a key to the house. Detective Demagon asked the forensics team to begin sweeping the entire house for DNA. This was to see if they could find something that would show who had been here lately. While that team got started on the painstaking work, Demagon continued to walk around the house slowly. He eventually found a Rolodex, which is basically a big book full of phone numbers and addresses. As the detective was flipping through that old book, he discovered that Monica had an ex-husband. This ex-husband was, of course, John Schmier. That evening, Detective Demagon and another investigator rolled up to John Schmier's house for an unexpected visit. They walked up to the front door and knocked loudly on the wood. A moment later, the door opened and John was standing there. He looked very surprised to see them standing there. In homicide cases, generally speaking, the spouse or ex-spouse is always the first suspect on the list. So even though Demagon did not really have any hard evidence linking John to the crime, he had the fact that this was her ex-spouse. Therefore, John was automatically considered suspicious by the police. Before John could ask any questions about their presence, Demagon and his partner introduced themselves. They asked John if they could come in and speak to him for a few minutes. So John replied, "Okay, come on in," and ushered them inside. They walked inside and sat down quietly in the living room. Once they were seated, Detective Demagon watched John very closely for a reaction. He told John why they were there in a clear voice. "Basically, your ex-wife has been murdered," Demagon explained, "and we are here to talk to you about it." Detective Demagon wanted to see if John would have a big reaction to the news. He was watching to see if John would have a subdued reaction instead. Whatever reaction he had could be telling as to how involved he was, or perhaps was not, in this tragic case. When Demagon told John that Monica had been shot to death, John's reaction was huge and immediate. His eyes went wide with shock and fear. He clutched at his chest like he was having a major heart attack. Then, he kind of leaned forward on the couch and began loudly sobbing. When he came back up again, the detective noticed something strange right away. There were no actual tears in John's eyes at all. It was just this huge theatrical reaction. Demagon could not really tell if the reaction was genuine or if John might be acting the part. He also did not have a baseline for John's normal behavior. But this seemed really dramatic, almost completely fabricated. So instead of trying to console John, Demagon just asked a point-blank question. "Where were you earlier this afternoon at the time of the shooting?" he asked directly. When he asked this, John, who was still rocking back and forth and grabbing his chest, stopped immediately. He put his hands by his side and simply said, "The truth." "Oh, I was at Hooters with my friends." This seemed too convenient to the detectives. A few days later, Detective Demagon went to the Hooters where John and his friends would always meet up. He asked the manager to see the security footage from the previous Wednesday. That Wednesday had been the day Monica was shot and murdered. By this point, Demagon had actually already interviewed all of the friends who had been at Hooters with John. These men were the so-called Orange Shorts Society members. He had asked them all about John and his whereabouts. He asked them if John had really been there and what John was doing. He also asked them what John had been saying that afternoon. They all insisted that John was absolutely there the whole time. There's no way he could have left, one friend had insisted. He could not have done anything to Monica. "He was here with us. I promise you, he was here." The friends would all admit to the detective that John did speak disparagingly about Monica. He would constantly talk about how mad he was about her alimony. He definitely did not like her very much at all. But that was the extent of his hatred, they claimed. Now, despite how convincingly these friends said John was there the whole time, Demagon still needed proof to back up their claims. He needed to really see that John had been there when he said he was there. The manager pulled up the security footage from the previous Wednesday. Wouldn't you know it, there was John. Part 5 of 25. The security footage showed John coming into the restaurant. He sat down with his buddies, taking his usual place at the table. He was there the entire time during the hours Monica was killed across town. So at this point, Demagon did feel like it sort of was impossible that John actually went and murdered Monica. But given the extreme contention between them, John apparently really did not like Monica. He hated making those cash payments to her every week. This obvious friction came up at these Orange Short Society meetings all the time. Maybe it was possible that John, who was pretty well off and had plenty of money, hired somebody. Maybe he hired someone to do his dirty work for him. Maybe he paid a professional hitman. So over the next week or so, Demagon and his team began exploring this possibility thoroughly. They found that John had been taking out a whole bunch of cash over the last several weeks from various ATMs, but the amount he was taking out actually lined up with how much cash he owed Monica. This was, of course, in the required form of alimony. They knew John had to deliver this alimony payment in cash to Monica in these envelopes, and they had found all those envelopes of cash at Monica's house untouched. It seemed like all John was doing was taking money out to give to Monica, as he was required to do. So John was basically Demagon's only solid suspect at this point in the case. And yet, there was basically no physical or circumstantial evidence against him at all. Demagon knew he really needed to look into other leads here. The John lead was ultimately going nowhere important. So he and his team began looking into local gang activity. They investigated other crimes in the immediate area. Could this murder have just been a random incident completely unrelated to John? After 3 months of looking for any connection anywhere in the area, they found nothing. There was not a single connection to be made, and the entire case came to a stall. At this point, Demagon decided that the only realistic thing he could do was start over from the beginning. He decided to go back to square one and basically re-examine all the evidence again. That included going back and looking at the security footage from the Hooters on that Wednesday afternoon. The day the Orange Shorts Society had met, and Monica was killed. Demagon sat down and started watching this specific tape over and over again. It was like the 1,000th time he had looked at this grainy, simple security footage. And suddenly, something stood out to him. Something he had missed all the other times he had looked at the film. As he replayed the footage over and over again, the truth was revealed to him. He realized he now knew almost certainly what happened to Monica that day. The killer was sentenced to life without parole. That same month in Seattle, Washington, another predator was hunting. The pattern was chillingly similar. What happened next would reveal a disturbing truth about human nature. This is what they found. It would turn out the grainy footage of the Orange Shorts Society meeting did hold the secret to Monica's murder. John Schmier did not kill his ex-wife, nor did he hire a hitman to do the job. He really had absolutely nothing to do with her tragic death. The only thing John did do was talk openly about how much he disliked Monica during these society meetups. In particular, he deeply resented the fact that she was making him deliver all this cash to her every single week. It just felt totally cumbersome and extremely inconvenient. But that meant John was regularly telling these men in the Orange Shorts Society that Monica was flushed with cash. He was giving her tons of cash every single week. This woman has so much cash at her house, he complained frequently. Eventually, one of the Orange Shorts Society members, a man named Tim Jacoby, decided he would take that cash. Demagon had been operating under the incorrect assumption that all the men present on that Wednesday meetup at Hooters made up the totality of the group. Those were all the official members of the society. The way the men talked about their group led to this conclusion. They said they all met up every single time. Same group, same seats, same restaurant. And so Demagon assumed that everybody was accounted for in the footage he reviewed. This was simply not the case, however. On the day of the brutal murder, one regular member of the Orange Shorts Society was not present at the usual table. That absent member was the man named Tim Jacoby. That is the significant discrepancy that Demagon finally caught when he watched that security footage for the 1,000th time. He suddenly realized, wait a minute, there's another guy. I heard another guy's name, Tim Jacoby. He's not here. Police would later tie Tim to the crime scene with indisputable DNA evidence. They determined that Tim went to Monica's house that afternoon with the intention of robbing her. But when Monica fought back against the intruder, He shot and killed her instantly. Then he fled the house without taking any money at all. Tim was ultimately convicted of first-degree murder in the brutal crime. He was sentenced to death for his actions. Today, he is currently sitting on death row in Pennsylvania. This case was another stark reminder of how greed can poison even close friendships. It shows that the threat can come from someone you never suspect. The killer was sentenced to life without parole. That same month, in Seattle, Washington, another predator was hunting. The pattern was chillingly similar. What happened next would reveal a disturbing truth about human nature. This is what they found. In July of 2016, in Chicago, Illinois, a woman named Jordan Baranskis opened her eyes. She realized she had fallen asleep on the couch the night before the long workday. She looked up slowly, noting that the television set was still turned on. Then she looked down at the other section of the large couch. Her boyfriend, Matt, was also asleep on the comfortable couch right next to her. As much as she wanted to keep sleeping alongside her boyfriend, she had work that day and needed to get ready. So she stood up, grabbed the remote control, and turned the television off immediately. Then she made her way upstairs to begin getting ready for the long day. Jordan was dedicated, punctual, reliable. She checked her phone constantly, a newer model that she kept in her purse. Being on time was not just a habit for her, it was a complete necessity for her career. Her entire life ran on a detailed schedule. She was a quiet person by nature, dedicated to her work, the kind of person who noticed details others missed. As soon as Jordan got upstairs, the very first thing she needed to do was go into her bedroom. She needed to get her purse, which she remembered leaving on the foot of her bed. But when she got into the large room, her purse was surprisingly not there at all. So she left her bedroom right away and started searching all the other rooms upstairs. She looked carefully in all the usual places, but she simply could not find her purse anywhere. She thought to herself, "I'm certain I had it last night. I remember rifling through my purse before going downstairs," she recalled clearly. She remembered starting to fold laundry before she ultimately fell asleep on the couch with Matt. After spending about 15 minutes looking unsuccessfully for the missing purse, she started to feel serious stress. She realized she was going to be late for work because she could not find the purse containing her essential items. She went back downstairs right away and woke Matt up immediately. She told him, "Hey, I've got to find my purse. I thought I left it upstairs, but apparently I did not," she explained quickly. "Can you help me look for it now?" she asked him directly. Matt rolled over in annoyance. He did not really want to get up at all because he was still pretty tired. He did not have work that day, so he wanted to keep sleeping. Matt asked her, "Well, are you sure you did not leave it at the restaurant last night? I mean, if you already looked up here, it is probably not here in the house," he suggested. "Do you want to just give them a call and see if you left it there?" Matt asked. Jordan was immediately really annoyed by his completely unhelpful reaction. She just wanted him to stand up and help her search for the purse. She had work soon, and he could easily go back to sleep later on. So this started a brief but escalating argument between the two of them. Matt just wanted her to call the restaurant immediately. He was totally convinced she had simply left it there. Jordan insisted, "No, I know I had my purse. I am positive I had it last night before I fell asleep on the couch with you." Their argument began to escalate a little more as they stood there in the living room. That is when Jordan remembered something important. They had recently installed a Nest camera downstairs to monitor their dogs when they were away. She thought, "We can just look at the footage on the Nest camera. We can see me walking into the apartment, and I will either have or not have my purse in my hand." So Jordan quickly opened up her app on her phone. She called Matt over to watch the feed with her. They went back to the night before, just before they had left for the restaurant. She clearly had her purse in her hand as they walked out the front door. Several hours went by in the footage, showing a quiet, empty apartment. Then they saw themselves coming back in from the date. Very clearly, Jordan still had her purse in her hand as she entered the apartment. Jordan turned to Matt right away. She said, "Told you so," with a frustrated tone. Matt conceded, "Okay, fine." Let me help you look. As they were about to put the app down and start searching, Jordan noticed a strange detail. She realized on the Nest camera timeline that motion was suddenly detected. The motion was detected at 3:30 in the morning. At that time, they were both clearly asleep on the couch, exhausted. So she quickly called Matt back over to her side. "Here, look," she said, pointing at the phone's screen. "There is motion detected at 3:30 in the morning." They hit the play button on the timeline. The footage showed the couple had already fallen asleep on the couch with the television on. Then, a hooded figure suddenly emerged from their upstairs hallway. The figure stood silently at the top of the stairs and just watched the two of them sleep peacefully. Before he finally left the apartment, the hooded man stole Jordan's purse. He also took a couple of other things from their apartment quickly. The couple looked at the timestamp with dread. This silent, terrifying encounter happened in their home while they were most vulnerable. They realized this strange person had been standing right above them for several minutes. They slept on, totally unaware of the danger. The horrifying truth is that this guy has somehow never been caught by the police. He has been given the nickname Creeper Ghost for his silent, strange actions. Jordan was terrified of the footage, reliving the moment that Stalker had been there. They checked the windows and doors, but everything seemed to be locked. How did he get in, and how did he get out without making a sound? This terrifying question hung in the air, heavy and unanswered. They knew they needed to call the police immediately. The invasion of their home felt intensely personal and deeply disturbing. This was not a normal burglar, this was something much stranger. The investigators arrived quickly and reviewed the footage with stunned silence. They confirmed that a crime had been committed. A man had entered the home, watched the residents, and stolen items. But they had no leads as to the identity of the hooded man. They checked with neighbors to see if anyone had seen anything strange that night. No one saw a thing, which only deepened the mystery of the Creeper Ghost. The police told Jordan and Matt to secure their locks and get new cameras. They said they would be in touch, but their lack of leads was worrying. The couple knew that the ghost was still out there somewhere, unseen. The detective remembered something important that Jordan had mentioned. "I am positive I had it last night before I fell asleep on the couch with you." The purse should have been found downstairs with them. The purse should not have been near the stairs. The footage was the key to understanding the paradox. The hooded figure definitely came from upstairs and stole the purse from the downstairs table or counter. The mystery of the silent entry and exit was never solved by the police. The focus quickly shifted to the sheer terror of being watched. The couple had to live with the knowledge that someone had seen them sleeping. This person had loitered at the top of their stairs, observing them in silence. They had been entirely helpless and unaware. This psychological attack was far worse than the theft itself. They moved their camera to cover the stairs directly, hoping to catch the phantom if he ever returned. But the Creeper Ghost was elusive and strange. He only appeared on the camera when motion was detected, but he was never seen entering or leaving the apartment. The police investigation stalled out within a few weeks. Without a clear lead or a clear way the man got in, they had to move on to other cases. Jordan and Matt tried to resume their normal lives, but they couldn't. Every sound at night made Jordan jump up to check the camera feed. Every shadow made Matt feel uneasy and suspicious. They could not shake the feeling that the ghost was still out there. Maybe he was still watching them from the dark. Maybe he was waiting for the perfect opportunity to come back inside the apartment. The purse was never found again. The strange disappearance, the silent entry, and the terrifying footage became a chilling local legend. The Creeper Ghost remained a terrifying mystery, a person who invaded a home just to watch. Nobody knew why he did it, nobody knew where he went, nobody knew if he was still out there, silent and unseen. The lack of answers was the ultimate horror for the young couple. They were forced to understand that the things you cannot explain are often the most frightening. The darkness was definitely closer than they thought. The fact that he was never caught meant he could be anywhere. This knowledge made the young couple feel trapped and vulnerable. Justice had been served. The family could finally rest. In Portland, Oregon, what appeared to be a simple missing person case would prove anything but simple. Sometimes the quietest cases hide the darkest secrets. On the morning of September 12, 2007, in Buffalo, New York, 20-year-old Ashley Wallace was in her dorm room. She was at Bryant and Stratton College and getting ready for her very first day of classes. This was really exciting and a huge moment for Ashley. She had just moved out completely on her own for the first time in her life. It truly felt like she was an adult here, ready to start a new life. So today was a big, important day for her future. She looked at herself in the mirror one last time. She made sure her look was just right and appropriate for class. She gathered up all her books and her journals and all the necessary materials she would need that day. Then, once she was fully ready, she began heading toward the door of the room. But before she got to the door, she heard a distinct knock. Ashley felt confused and slightly unsettled by the noise. She had not lived here long enough for people to actually know she lived in this specific room. She thought, who would be coming to visit me already? She certainly did not have any plans to see anybody today, her first day. So she walked slowly to the door and opened it up cautiously. She was truly shocked now to see who was standing there in the hallway, but her initial shock quickly turned into intense fear. There were 2 police officers standing right in the hallway outside her door. The officers were looking right at Ashley, and the looks on their faces were very serious and grim. The reason Ashley felt so scared was not because she had done anything wrong in her life. It was because in her life before college, she had experienced some pretty severe trauma. Her father had suddenly passed away when she was 13 years old. It had been a sudden heart attack, and it was a very traumatic loss for her. It sort of threw the family for a complete loop when it happened. Then her mother had remarried another man. Her stepfather had raised her from that point onward. He had struggled with depression on and off for years. It had seemed like he was doing okay for a while, but not long after her biological father had suddenly died, her stepfather took his own life tragically. Once again, Ashley and her family's lives were completely turned upside down by grief. In many ways, Ashley had not really recovered from those 2 significant losses. They had happened not that long ago in the past, and now she was out here on her own, trying hard to be a self-sufficient adult. She was trying her very best to stay composed and focused. But she just had this awful, sinking feeling when she saw the police officers. She immediately thought they were there to tell her that somebody else close to her family had died tragically. When the officers actually began speaking to Ashley, it became clear they were not there to notify her about a new death. They were there to talk about her family and something that happened 7 years earlier. They told her they were there to speak to her about her father, her biological father. He had passed away 7 years earlier, which was a long time ago. So when they said that to Ashley, she was confused and asked what they wanted to know about her dad. The officers then told her shocking news. Ashley, we exhumed your father, they explained to the young woman. It turns out he very likely did not die of a heart attack as everyone believed, they continued, their faces grim. We think he was murdered by someone. About 30 minutes later, the officers had finally left Ashley's small dorm room. Ashley was left feeling completely distraught by the encounter. Number one, she had just found out that there was a strong suspicion her father was killed by somebody. But worse than that was the way the officers had acted toward her. These 2 officers who had been there were not there to console Ashley in her grief. They were there to effectively interrogate her for the suspected crime. They were looking into the family to see if Ashley was involved in what happened to her father. For Ashley, this had truly caught her off guard and made her highly suspicious. She felt like she was stammering and confused in all of her answers to their questions. This only made her seem more suspicious to the detectives who were watching her closely. Every little misstep she had, the police would dial in and ask even more pointed questions. By the end of the difficult conversation, she was sobbing uncontrollably and pleading with them. I didn't do this. I didn't hurt my dad, she insisted repeatedly. I have no idea who would do that terrible thing. Eventually, the police had gotten up and left the room, but they sternly told Ashley they were going to be in touch with her soon. Then they were gone from the campus. Ashley was just left there alone in her room, wondering what she was supposed to do next. She thought about sucking it up and just going to her classes right away, but she kept thinking, how can I possibly focus on class right now? She had just learned this horrible information and had this traumatic experience with the police. So Ashley ended up calling her mother immediately. Her mother, whose name was Stacy, was obviously very upset when she picked up the phone. She was crying even before Ashley had said anything to her. Ashley quickly learned that her mother also had a similar experience with the police that day. She had also been told that her husband had apparently been killed by foul play. The police were now investigating her to see if maybe she had something to do with the murder. So the two women just sort of cried on the phone together, sharing their mutual shock and fear. They began saying things like, I just don't understand. Who would want to hurt him? It just doesn't make any sense at all. They've got to be wrong about this whole thing. None of this makes any sense to either of us. Eventually, Ashley's mother, Stacy, just told her daughter to come home immediately. Forget about classes, Stacy insisted. We can deal with that stuff later. Just come home and be with your family now. Ashley immediately agreed that coming home was the most reasonable thing she could do at that difficult time. So she grabbed her stuff quickly, left the dorm room, and hopped in her small car. She drove the hour back to her mom's place without hesitation. When Ashley got there, she went inside the house immediately. The first person she saw was actually her younger sister, Bree, who was 16 years old. Bree's eyes were red and puffy. She obviously had been crying deeply over the situation. In the first couple of seconds they spoke, it was immediately clear that Bri, too, had had a sort of rough interaction with the police that day. So it was like the whole family had been suddenly thrust into this chaotic moment. None of them could make any sense of what was happening to them. On the one hand, they thought, who would want to hurt Dad? But on the other, they wondered, did this really happen to him? Is this just a terrible mistake the police are making? Why did they exhume his body in the first place? What exactly is going on here? There was just so much unknown information hanging in the air around them. That afternoon, Ashley, her sister Bree, and their mom Stacy just retreated to their mother's kitchen. They mostly sat there and cried together, sharing their grief and confusion. They talked through this horrible, impossible situation the best they could, trying to find answers. Eventually, later in the day, the tears had sort of stopped flowing from their eyes. The grim reality had finally set in for all of them. This was now a very complicated situation, if nothing else, demanding their attention. Basically, they were all suddenly under investigation for the potential murder of their father and husband. They truly did not know what was going to happen to any of them next. But there was a lot of intense stress around the next couple of difficult days. Under all this overwhelming stress, Stacy, the mom, suddenly said, "You know what? I'm getting a drink. Do any of you girls want a drink to calm down?" she asked them. Bree was only 16 years old at the time, and she immediately declined the offer. But Ashley said, "Sure," deciding to join her mother. She was 20 years old at that point, not 21 yet, but she was drinking alcohol. So she said, "Yep, I'll take a drink," looking for a momentary escape. Stacy then mixed some alcoholic drinks for herself, and Ashley immediately. She also prepared a non-alcoholic drink for Bree, respecting her age. For the rest of the night, the girls just sat in the kitchen together. They were having their drinks and trying hard not to let this horrible situation totally wreck their lives. The next morning, when Ashley woke up inside of her mother's house, she found she was really hungover. She had definitely had some drinks the night before with her mom and her sister. Ashley was thinking to herself that the level of hungover she was feeling felt disproportionate. She was really hungover despite a relatively small amount of alcohol consumed. But Ashley was wondering if maybe part of the reason she felt so terrible was not just a simple hangover, maybe it was this emotional fallout from the horrible thing that had happened the day before. Ashley was laying in bed feeling so physically bad and emotionally drained. She was convincing herself that she just needed to get up right away. I need to go to my classes and try to focus, she thought to herself. I need to sort of treat the day like a normal day at college. This was necessary to get her life back together and be ready to deal with the police soon. So Ashley sort of willed herself out of the bed, forcing herself to move. She had a blinding headache that pounded relentlessly. She felt horrible and weak all over her body. But nonetheless, she took a long shower and got herself together for the day. Before long, she was saying goodbye to her mom and sister in the kitchen. She was driving back to the college campus, trying to forget the previous day. When she got there, she still felt completely terrible and exhausted. But she went to her classes and she did her absolute best to focus on the lectures. This really turned out to be a gargantuan task for the exhausted student, but somehow she managed to complete the difficult task. Finally, at the end of the day, during her last class, Ashley began to sort of break out of this terrible hangover fog she was in. She began sort of feeling normal and strong again as the class ended. So by the time she left the lecture hall and was officially done for the day, she actually felt good enough. She hopped right back in her car and drove right back to her mother's house in Buffalo. That night, again, just like the night before, she, her sister, and her mother sat in the kitchen. They were having this cathartic moment together, sharing their stories and theories. They were crying together, talking about their dead father, sharing good memories. They were also having a few drinks again, trying to cope with the stress. And again, Bree did not have any alcohol that night, but Ashley and her mother both did drink alcohol. The next morning, when Ashley woke up, once again, her head was pounding with pain. She was so hungover, way worse than the day before, she thought. Except when she opened her eyes and kind of looked around the strange room, that was not the first thing that hit her. The first thing that hit her with confusion was that she did not know where she was. The room looked different and totally unfamiliar to her. As she kind of adjusted her eyes and looked around carefully, she realized she was inside a hospital room. Ashley began to panic immediately and began looking around the room for her family. She looked for anybody she recognized or knew, but nobody she knew was in the room. There were just two police officers sitting against the wall quietly. These two officers, when they saw Ashley coming to consciousness, got up right away. They walked over to her bedside and explained what had happened to her. They told her she was very lucky to be alive at all. Her mother had actually found her in her bed at her mother's house that morning. Ashley had been completely unresponsive to her mother's calls, so her frantic mother had called an ambulance immediately. The medical staff had rushed her here to the hospital. Luckily, she was stabilized now by the doctors, but apparently she was very close to full-blown organ failure. She had almost died right there in her bed. It was very lucky she got to the emergency room when she did. But before Ashley could ask any questions about what was wrong with her, the officers interrupted her. They were ready to talk about the investigation, not her health. They looked at each other, and then one of them pulled a piece of paper out of his pocket. They handed it to Ashley as she lay in the hospital bed. The officer told her, "You need to explain yourself now." It would turn out that the way Ashley's stepfather had taken his own life was by drinking antifreeze. At least that was the initial theory presented to the family. But pretty quickly, investigators started to say, why would somebody take their own life that way? Drinking antifreeze is slow and extremely painful. That is not a good first choice if you are going to take your own life. As suspicions quickly rose around the stepfather's unusual death, investigators thought of something else. Well, the biological father died just a few years before, they remembered, and apparently he died of a sudden heart attack, they recalled. But maybe we ought to make absolutely sure about that first death. Is it possible somebody killed the biological father, too? They wondered. so they exhumed the body of the biological father immediately. During the autopsy, they shockingly discovered antifreeze in his remains as well. So now, fast forward to the hospital room where Ashley has just woken up. These officers have walked over to her bedside aggressively. They have handed her a confusing note and told her to explain herself immediately. This note was effectively a full confession to the two murders. The writer of this strange note said that they had killed Ashley's biological father first, then they had also killed Ashley's stepfather later on. But now, because of the blood on their hands, the note continued ominously, they are going to take their own lives. So this paper was a suicide note and a confession combined into one. At the bottom of this horrific note, it was signed clearly by the name Ashley. But Ashley had not killed her father or her stepfather at all. Her own mother, Stacy, had actually committed both crimes. Her mother, Stacy, had used antifreeze to poison and kill both men in her life. And then when police began poking around the family, Stacy panicked immediately. The police were suggesting that someone killed the stepfather, and maybe the biological father too. So what did Ashley's beloved mother do in a moment of sheer terror? She tried to poison her own daughter, her flesh and blood. Stacy laced those alcoholic drinks they were having in the kitchen with all these powerful painkillers. She tried to make it look exactly like Ashley had taken her own life, driven by guilt. Stacy wanted to frame her daughter for the two murders she had committed, except Ashley's mother called the ambulance a little bit too early the following morning. She was feigning that she had just found her daughter unresponsive in bed. The ambulance showed up quickly, and the first responders immediately saved Ashley's young life. Apparently, she was within 15 minutes of dying right there in the bed when she showed up at the hospital. Stacy was later convicted of 2 counts of murder for the men. She was also convicted of the attempted murder of her own daughter, Ashley. Stacy was sentenced to 51 years in prison for her crimes. However, she would die behind bars in 2016 before serving her full sentence. The case was closed. Around the same time, in Portland, Oregon, a similar evil was taking root. The methods were eerily familiar. Investigators would soon wonder if they were dealing with a pattern. In April of 1999, in Seattle, Washington, 35-year-old Christopher Casey's was living his best life. He had moved to Seattle to pursue a career in the demanding music industry. Christopher had successfully landed a job at a music company in Seattle right away. He had rapidly risen to the rank of executive at that company, a sign of his dedication. He was known for being incredibly fit and healthy, taking his fitness seriously. Christopher was known for being at the gym 7 days a week without fail. He took vitamins and generally took his overall health very seriously. He also had loads of friends who really liked him. He was very close with his supportive family. Despite all his popularity and his obvious professional success, Christopher had been single for years. Even though he was not actively seeking a romantic companion, his friends and family were continuously trying to set him up on dates. But Chris would always prefer to not go on a date with a stranger. He would much rather stay home by himself and listen to his extensive music collection. This was because Christopher had a strange obsession with a very specific type of music. He especially loved music from ancient times, particularly from Egypt, so he would happily stay home instead of going out on dates. He would just crush ancient Egyptian music lost in the rhythm. That was Christopher's idea of a truly great night alone. On April 11th of 1999, Chris was on a business trip for the company. Part of his executive job required a ton of travel all over the country. He was on this trip with a couple of his coworkers. These coworkers were also friends of his, and they went out to San Francisco together. On the 11th, they decided to go out for a group dinner that night. One of his coworkers decided to bring along a friend who lived in the San Francisco area. They all got to the restaurant for dinner that evening. The coworker's friend was an older woman, very attractive, and very kind of intense looking. She was about 20 years older than Chris. She was his guest for the dinner that night. She sat down with the rest of the group. The four of them were just kind of having a nice, friendly conversation together. At some point during the meal, the older woman really took an immediate interest in Chris. Chris, in turn, took an interest in her, which was unusual for him. It would turn out that they had a lot in common right away. She admitted to him that she was really into music from ancient times. She even had a specific interest in music from ancient Egypt, just like him. Chris was completely stunned by this amazing coincidence. He thought, how can this be? This is my passion. I love that type of music, he told her honestly. They really hit it off immediately, discussing their shared passion. Now, Chris was not looking for any sort of romantic involvement with this older woman. He was just so genuinely excited to talk about something he loved deeply. So, all night, Chris and this older woman were chatting it up in the restaurant. They were super into each other's conversation and ideas. Chris was looking at her purely from a platonic sense, as a friend. But it was becoming clear by the end of the long night that her feelings were different. At least Chris was realizing that she was looking at him with a romantic angle. She was definitely interested in Chris beyond friendship. Right as he was kind of realizing this difference, she suddenly asked him a question. She asked if he wanted to leave the dinner with her immediately. She suggested they go back to her place nearby. Chris politely declined her invitation to leave. He was not interested in her romantically, he gently explained. He loved chatting with her about their shared music and other things they had in common, but he simply was not interested in her in a romantic way. She became a little bit more aggressive in her pursuit immediately. No, come on! Let's get out of here, she insisted strongly. I got a place right down the road from here, she explained. We can go listen to music and hang out in my place all night. Chris felt really uncomfortable with her sudden insistence. He kept saying no repeatedly, but she would not let the subject go. Finally, as she was literally trying to convince him to say yes, he stood up. He told her, hey, you know what? I've had a long night, and I'm gonna go now. So he stood up to leave the table and the restaurant immediately. The woman suddenly went from being very flirtatious and friendly to very angry with Chris. She looked directly at him and kind of abruptly announced her revenge. She said, I'm actually a witch, and I'm going to put a curse on you right now. She then added an ominous promise to his terror. You're going to be dead within a week from this curse. Chris, stunned, just left the restaurant right then and there. The next morning, on April 12th, Chris got up early for his flight. He headed to the San Francisco airport and flew back home to Seattle. When he landed safely in Seattle, he immediately called his friend Sammy. Sammy was one of his very close friends from when he lived on the East Coast. He just wanted to share this strange, weird experience with a trusted, close friend. They were kind of laughing about the whole unbelievable thing together. Neither of them were taking the supposed curse seriously at all. Sammy joked, You really dodged a bullet. It's good you did not go home with her. In good spirits, Chris hung up the phone with Sammy, feeling much better. For the next 24 hours, Chris fell right back into his regular daily life in Seattle. Nothing out of the ordinary happened to him. Everything felt normal. But all that normalcy would change quickly starting the night of April 13th. This was 48 hours after his bizarre encounter with the woman in San Francisco. Chris lives alone and he does not have any pets in his apartment. He got into bed that night, ready for sleep. Chris was laying there in the dark, trying to fall asleep. He suddenly hears soft whispering coming from outside of his bedroom door. The sound seemed to be coming from the kitchen area, kind of near the front door. He thought to himself, I did not just hear whispering. No one is in here. What is going on with me? He wondered in confusion. He clearly hears the whispering, and then it suddenly stops completely. Before he can even get up to investigate the strange noise, he stops himself. He thought, okay, I probably was just hearing things. That was not real. It was my imagination playing tricks. He is just kind of laying there in the dark, trying hard to go back to sleep. Then he hears the whispering noise again, louder this time. Except now, it is not coming from the kitchen area near the front door. It is coming from a separate area in his apartment outside the room he is in. So now he starts wondering, seriously, did someone sneak into my apartment quietly? Is there a burglar in my house right now, hiding in the dark? So he quietly gets out of his warm bed right away. He walks over to his bedroom door slowly. He opens the door up just a crack and pokes his head out. He can still clearly hear the strange whispering noise. It is coming from like his laundry room a little ways away from the door. But as soon as he opens the door and pokes his head out into the hall, the whispering stops entirely. He is just standing there in the hallway, looking around frantically. He is hoping there is absolutely nothing at all in his apartment with him. Then, out of the corner of his eye, near the front door, he sees something terrifying. Something dashes quickly across his periphery vision. It looked like a shadowy figure that basically darts across the room in a second. So he looks over to the area immediately, and he is afraid that it really is a burglar. He is afraid someone is in his room right now. As he is looking in that direction, he is turning the light on next to him quickly. He is looking all around the silent room. He starts hearing the whispering again right away. And now it is coming from another section of his house entirely, so he just starts turning on all the lights he can find. He is frantically looking around to try to make sure no one is in his apartment. He is not even thinking about the whispering sounds anymore. He is just looking for the shadowy figure that he saw run past him earlier. He searches all over his small apartment completely. All the lights are on now, making everything visible. As soon as he feels comfortable that the door is still locked, he stops his search. Everything is locked securely, and there is absolutely nobody else here. That is when he realizes that the horrible whispering is still happening. So he turns back around slowly and looks for the sound. Now, the whispering is coming from his bedroom where he was sleeping. He walks over to his bedroom and looks inside the room. He just cannot pinpoint the source of the whispering. He keeps hearing it clearly. Chris keeps walking to wherever the sound seems to be coming from in the dark, but as soon as he gets near the spot, the strange whispering stops completely. He is standing there, wondering to himself, am I dreaming this whole thing? Is this a very elaborate and terrifying dream? Am I losing my mind completely now? Did somebody slip me something strange last night? What is wrong with me right now? He wonders in desperation. So he has this horrible night where he is up all night long. He is constantly chasing down these whispers in his small apartment. The strange sounds keep vanishing right before he can find them. He keeps seeing shadowy figures running around quickly. The figures seem to be lurking in the dark corners, silent and terrifying, but he can never fully see them when he looks directly at the spots. The next morning, on April 14th, the sun comes up outside. Chris has not slept at all the entire night. The very first phone call he makes is to his friend Sammy. He is totally panicked and scared out of his mind. We know about this phone call because Sammy would later tell police about all her interactions with Chris. She spoke about all the events over the course of that difficult week. She would tell the police later that Chris was totally panicked that morning. She even thought, as she was taking this phone call, that this was all so weird. Chris was terrified of noises and figures moving around in his apartment. This behavior was so unlike Chris, who was usually stoic and rational. He was definitely a skeptic, just a no BS kind of guy. So the idea that he would suddenly be terrified of something paranormal seemed so strange. But as she was listening to him, he sounded genuinely scared. He was so scared about what was actually in his apartment. He knew that it was not a person who was doing this. He had looked everywhere for an intruder, and there were no people. That is the only reason he did not call the police. He did not want to tell the police that some shadow figure was whispering. He did not want to say it was harassing him in the apartment. He worried, what are the police going to do about a shadow? Sammy hangs up the phone with Chris after trying to reassure him that he was safe. She just hopes that whatever that frightening experience was does not happen again soon. But unfortunately for Chris, the night of the 14th was just as bad. Now he is going to bed again, and he starts hearing the horrific whispers again. He is out there immediately, frantically looking for the source. He turns all the lights on again in the dark apartment. He is looking for these whispers which keep disappearing right before his eyes. He cannot find the source of the noise. He is getting extremely frustrated and scared now. He keeps seeing that dark thing dart around his apartment quickly. Except this night, he also noticed something new and terrifying. He would look and he could get close enough to the shadow figure, he could almost break out the silhouette of what looked like a person. The figure was lingering right in the corner of his apartment, watching. But he would go closer to it and it would disappear immediately. It was like the manifestations of what he was seeing were becoming more vivid. The whispers and this figure running around his apartment were now stronger. But he is also still thinking, I did not sleep the night before at all. This could all be my imagination playing tricks on me, he reasons. I do not know if this is actually happening or if it is just a dream. But he is completely spiraling, and he knows it is happening to him. So the next day, on the 15th, he does not call Sammy again. But he calls a couple of his other close friends who remain anonymous. They would all tell police later that they got a similar story. They heard the same terrifying account that Sammy had gotten that first night. No matter what was truly happening, Chris believed it was happening to him. And Chris was absolutely terrified by the reality he was living. But this was not even the worst of the horror yet to come for him. So, that night, on the 15th, Chris got into bed to try again. Now, he had barely slept for 2 consecutive nights in a row. He was determined to just go to sleep immediately. He is trying hard to tell himself that everything he has experienced is just stress. The terrifying visions are certainly brought on by his extreme lack of sleep. So he is telling himself, just go to sleep. Just get in bed and go to sleep now. So he gets in bed and he is laying there in the dark. He does fall asleep for a little while, but he wakes up suddenly in the middle of the night. He realizes with dread that he cannot move his body at all. He is completely paralyzed, unable to move a muscle, but he is totally awake and conscious in the dark room. And then he starts clearly hearing the whispering again. His level of absolute fear is so high now because he is completely immobile. He has heard that terrifying whispering in his apartment for 2 nights. He has seen that dark figure moving around his apartment constantly. So he is laying there in darkness, completely helpless. The case seemed closed. But in Los Angeles, new evidence revealed this wasn't an isolated incident. 1 victim became 7, 1 killer became a pattern. This is what they found. In October of 1974, a woman named Christine waited until Michael had left the house. He was heading out to one of the group meetings, then Christine immediately hopped in her car. She followed him to the church where the meetings were held. When she got there, she parked her car quickly. She took a deep, steady breath before she got out. She made her way to the front doors of the church. Then she quickly stormed inside the building. She easily found the room where these prayer meetings were held. She abruptly barges into the room, filled with anger. She points her finger directly at her husband. Michael, I know you're having an affair with Marie, she accuses loudly. You're going to admit it in front of this whole group right now, she demands. Michael is sitting with his back to his wife in one of the chairs. He stands up slowly, not immediately addressing his wife's accusation. Instead, he turns and looks at Marie on the other side of the room. When Marie suddenly made eye contact with Michael, she screamed loudly. She would later say that Michael did not look human to her. He looked exactly like a terrifying beast, and he had wild eyes. As Michael is standing there staring at Marie, his face looking very aggressive, he began breaking out in tongues. Speaking in tongues is where the speaker utters words or sounds that resemble a language. But the speaker does not know what those strange sounds mean at all. The idea for the group is that some entity has come inside of their body. This evil entity is dictating their speech directly. So Michael is now broken out in tongues, yelling loudly. He is barking these strange words and sounds at Marie intensely. Everyone inside of the room has absolutely no idea what to make of this bizarre scene. Everything has happened so suddenly, and it is extremely surprising to them all. You have the wife suddenly coming in and aggressively accusing her husband of cheating. Michael is not responding to her, and he is acting totally crazy and possessed. Before anyone can do anything to stop him, Michael goes from just barking strange languages at Marie. He suddenly rushes across the room as if he is going to attack her violently. When he does that, the rest of the members quickly jump on top of him. They hold him down to prevent any violence from happening. Despite there being 10 or 15 people holding him down, Michael is still struggling. He is still trying to get up and charge at Marie. He is screaming and snarling and yelling at Marie without stopping. Then Marie suddenly breaks out into tongues too, yelling the same strange sounds. It is only then that Michael stops trying to force himself up out of the pig pile. Instead, he just continues to speak in tongues directly to Marie. So the two of them are looking at each other, speaking loudly in their own strange tongues. The rest of the fellowship group is just totally dumbfounded by the intense display, so they immediately just begin praying loudly for the couple. Then, after about an hour of this chaos, Michael just collapses completely. It is like he went entirely unconscious, drained of energy. At that point, everybody in the room just goes silent and looks at the floor. Then Michael kind of opens his eyes slowly. It is almost like he is waking up from a deep sleep. He begins looking around frantically, trying to figure out what had just happened to him. Michael would later claim he had no memory of the terrifying things he had just said and done. Part 22 of 25. At this point, Marie would tell Michael and Christine a serious theory. She believed Michael was possessed by a strong demonic force. The only thing they could do at this point would be to perform a religious exorcism. An exorcism is an expulsion, or attempted expulsion, of a supposedly evil spirit. This evil spirit is thought to be inside of a person or a physical place. Michael and Christine were completely at a loss for how to handle the situation. They had no idea what to do in this terrifying situation. They were both kind of in shock for very different reasons, frozen in fear. So they just kind of deferred to Marie's judgment entirely. They said, yeah, I think an exorcism is the way to go forward. So Christine and Michael immediately left the church and went home. The next morning, Marie would get in touch with the Anglican Church of England. She would formally request an exorcism to be performed on Michael. After hearing about what was going on with Michael, the Anglican Church agreed. They said, yeah, that does sound like he definitely needs an exorcism now. So the following day, they would quickly send out 2 of their best exorcists. Their names were Peter and Raymond, and they were experts. Peter and Raymond got to OET and went straight to Michael's house. They observed him closely for any signs of possession. Very quickly, they determined that it did seem like Michael was possessed. They believed he was possessed by at least one powerful demonic force. So they told Michael directly, the only thing we can do here is perform this exorcism ritual, but we need you to fully agree to it first, they warned him. Michael immediately said, okay, yes, I agree to this exorcism right now. His wife also agreed, saying she was going along for the ride. She was just completely unsure what to do anymore. So a day later, on October 4th, at 10 p.m., everyone met again. Michael, his wife, and the rest of the fellowship group were all there. Peter and Raymond, the exorcists, were also present for the ritual. They all met at this other church in a neighboring town away from their community. As soon as Michael had been positioned in the middle of this large group in a chair, the ritual began. Peter and Raymond began the ritual by praying loudly over him. As soon as they did, Michael began screaming out in tongues again, louder than before. He began writhing around violently in the chair. He quickly fell to the ground in a desperate struggle. He began contorting his body into grotesque, inhuman positions. It was as if the very words Peter and Raymond were saying were physically harming Michael. After 8 long hours of this horrific ritual, the men finally came to a stop. During those hours, they had to actually tie Michael down to the floor. This was to prevent him from violently hurting other members or hurting himself. Peter and Raymond were completely exhausted by the intense ritual. It looked very much like Michael, too, was utterly exhausted and drained. As soon as they stopped the exorcism ritual, Michael just kind of collapsed on the ground. It was as if he had fallen entirely unconscious again, silent and still. Then at some point, he kind of wakes up slowly, looking dazed. He is looking around wildly, still tied down to the floor. He is acting like he has no idea what has just happened to him at all. At this point, Peter and Raymond tell him the results of the long ritual. They told him that the exorcism was mostly successful in its aims. "We identified 40 demons inside of you completely," they explained to Michael. And this exorcism was able to expel 37 of them from your body, they revealed. "So, that means there are still 3 demons inside of you right now," they warned him. "Now, we cannot do the rest of the ritual right now," they insisted. "We are simply too tired and you are too exhausted to continue," they told him honestly. "So, go home now, get some rest, and recover fully," the exorcists advised. "Tomorrow, we will finish this exorcism completely," they promised Michael. "We will get rid of those 3 remaining demons, and you will be just fine again." So Michael and Christine got their things together and left the church. They headed straight back home in the early morning light. A few hours later, around noon, a woman who lived near Michael Taylor's family thought she heard something strange. It sounded exactly like someone yelling in pain outside of her house. So she went to the front of her house to investigate the noise. She pulled the curtain aside on one of her front windows. Outside, walking down the street, she saw something horrifying. Michael Taylor was completely naked, covered in fresh blood. He was saying something unsettling about Satan to himself. So this woman immediately called the police right away. The police showed up quickly, and they found Michael on the sidewalk. He had curled up on the cold sidewalk outside of this woman's house. He was giggling hysterically like a child in the fetal position. The police quietly approached Michael on the sidewalk. At some point, Michael apparently snapped out of the strange trance he was in. He starts looking up at the police officers with wide eyes. He acts like he has absolutely no idea what is going on or why they are there. Eventually, they would get him to tell them his correct name. They also got him to tell them where he lived nearby. After calling in backup to properly deal with Michael, the responding officers made their way to Michael's residence. They immediately went inside the house to check on the family. As soon as they saw what was in the house, one of the officers just turned around quickly. He ran outside and began violently dry heaving. The inside of the Taylor family home would quickly become one of the most infamous crime scenes. It was a shocking scene in all of English history. A few hours earlier, when Michael and his wife had come home from the intense exorcism, they had gone inside the quiet house. Then, Michael had suddenly fallen into one of his dangerous trances again. He began severely beating his wife, Christine. At some point during the beating, she fell to the ground. She was either dead or was in the process of dying from his attack. At that terrible point, Michael jumped on top of her lifeless body. Using only his bare hands, he ripped her face off violently. He flung her face across the blood-soaked room in a mad frenzy. Then, as she is laying there on the floor, bleeding to death, he began rubbing her blood all over his own body. After she had finally died in the terrible attack, he tracked down the family dog. He killed the innocent dog as well in his rage. Fortunately, their 5 young children were not home at the time of this brutal attack, so they were all completely unharmed by the violence. During Michael's highly publicized trial, the prosecution and the defense argued about the cause. They blamed the Anglican Church of England and Marie's religious group entirely. They said the church had convinced Michael he was possessed with dangerous demons. This belief caused him to act out violently and murder his wife Christine. So, ultimately, Michael would be found not guilty by reason of insanity. After only 4 short years of required psychiatric care, he was released from the hospital. Michael Taylor is still currently living free in OET today. But despite the legal outcomes of this complicated case, there are many people who still debate it. People who are both religious and not religious have theories. They believe the Michael Taylor case is one of the only true demonic possession cases. They think it is one of the only verified cases in modern history. Also, just to finally close the loop on the rumors, we do not know for sure. We do not know if Michael and Marie were actually having an affair, but it is widely assumed that they were involved. That tragic night, the demon, the curse, the paranoia, it all came to a head. The forces Michael thought were chasing him finally caught up. It was a terrifying end to a terrifying story. And as the final story ends, so does the rain. The drumming against the windows fades to silence. The streets outside begin to dry. But some stories, like some nights, stay with you long after the rain has stopped, long after the darkness fades. These 13 cases, they linger. That's the last one. 13 cases across 25 parts, all real, all verified. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. These stories take time to research and put together, and your time means everything. If you want more, hit subscribe. Tell me in the comments which case affected you most, which detail you can't stop thinking about. And remember, these aren't just stories. These things happened to real people in real places. Some of them might be closer than you think. Stay safe out there. Good night.